Hello, everybody. This is Todd Dewey from Ice Road Truckers on the History Channel, and I love to listen to TNC Radio.live.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to The Train Station on TNCRadio.live. I'm Bill Waltrip, your host, along with my co-host, Jim Leaders, and we have another great guest this week, and we appreciate him joining us. Our guest this week is Andrew Hudanish. We have known Andrew since he was a young man, and he's grown up in the railroad industry and advanced very far, and he has a fascinating story. Welcome to the show, Andrew. It's good to have you with us.
Well, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, as we always do when we start out on the show here, we like to learn about your early life. Where were you born and raised? Where did you go to school? And more importantly, we're going to lead up how you got into railroading, and want to find out, did you have any family in railroading in the past or current? What led you down the path to get into railroading?
All right. Well, my family is not a railroad family. We're an oil and gas family, primarily with Exxon. So my dad moved around quite a bit, lived in Delaware for the majority of my younger years, and then moved to Texas in 1982, moved to the Woodlands, and stayed there until 2019. So I was there quite a while. I did go to school with the help of my employer, Union Pacific. Went to Bellevue University in Omaha, Nebraska.
Now, I see that, and I wanted to ask you about that. Was this like an online course, or did you actually go to Nebraska to take the courses?
No, it was 100% online. I had already taken all the basics at Lamar here in Beaumont.
Right.
And then transferred everything up there to Bellevue, which Union Pacific had a program with where they would actually post pay for your school, which was really nice. You didn't have to pay up front, and based on your grades is how much Union Pacific would then contribute towards your education.
Did you got a BS in project management? Did Union Pacific kind of lead you down that path for a future with Union Pacific, or was that something you just was interested in?
No, it was something that I did a lot of research on. Most project managers that are out there are IT based or process based.
Right.
But I was managing projects for the Union Pacific at the time, so it was a good fit for my current job when I was taking the classes.
Gotcha. So you have no family in railroading. So where did the interest come from? Just automatically, just on your own? It's like, ooh, trains. Like the rest of us.
It's funny you bring that up, Bill, because you're actually the person that got me in with Union Pacific.
What?
Yes.
You've never told me that before.
I didn't. I shouldn't have to tell you. You're the one that brought it up. So one day I was working for Motorola. I was a service technician, and I was driving between Pearland and Deer Park.
All right.
And I get a call over RailNet, which
yes.
you're just a fan of also. And you put out the blanket statement, do you know anybody that would like to be a train dispatcher?
Wow. I honestly don't remember that, but okay, go ahead.
Yes, it was just out of the blue. So they were taking open resumes at the time.
Okay.
And they had changed their education requirements because they were getting a lot of military people applying for the jobs who were ex-air traffic controllers that did not have college educations. Well, at the time, I didn't have a college education either. I had part of one.
Right.
But I was working, supporting my family, that kind of stuff. And the call just came in at the absolute most perfect time. I sent my resume to Omaha, and that was like in, I think, April, maybe early May of 98. And June the 9th, they flew me up to Omaha for an interview, and I took my entrance exams and that kind of stuff that was necessary for UP at the time, and passed it all with flying colors. In July, I get a letter in the mail asking me if I would report to Omaha on September the 7th of 1998 to begin as an apprentice train dispatcher.
So you trained at the bunker up there in Omaha.
I did not.
Ah, the story continues.
Yes. So they had an off-site training facility.
Oh, okay.
It was still downtown Omaha. This is back before the new headquarters building and that stuff. The old headquarters was still around.
Right.
Say they had some rental space or lease space on the second floor of a Walgreens store.
Okay, use what you got, I guess. All right.
Yeah, and it worked out that I went and learned CAD, went and learned all the G-Core rules and everything, and then flew out to Salt Lake City for a couple weeks to actually take my rules test, which I made 100% on.
Of course you did.
And then came back to Omaha 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, and then finished out my classroom training and left the Wednesday before Thanksgiving of 1998, drove home and reported to the Spring Dispatching Center for my OJT.
So you never actually worked in the main dispatch area up in Omaha. You did some training and viewing and all that, but all your years of dispatching were all in the Houston area?
Except for 1 month where they transferred some jobs up to Omaha from Spring.
All right.
And I went up there to train the people that were taking over. So I did work for about a month in the bunker. But other than that, yes, I did do all of my career in the building in Spring, Texas.
So I'm responsible for all this. I don't know whether you're going to shake my hand or punch me in the nose. I don't know.
Oh, no, Bill, it was the best thing that ever happened to me.
Well, that's wonderful to hear. As you can tell, I'm a bit blown away because I had no idea that I had anything to do with that. That's
yeah.
Well, that's wonderful. So tell me about, you said it was quite a while of the training, the OJT and things like that. Was it overwhelming when you saw all this stuff in the CAD and all the rules? It's a complicated business, and the dispatcher is a very, very vital part of it. It's basically the heartbeat of the railroad to me. Was it overwhelming to you, or was it a piece of cake? How do you view it?
I had come from a trucking dispatching background before I went to the railroad.
Right.
I was, like I said, I was working for Motorola before that, but during the training and everything, they instill in you that all the rules. So you have a rule book that's the size of an old Houston Yellow Pages telephone book.
Oh my goodness.
It was probably 500 or 600 pages long. And they say that every rule is written in blood.
Oh,
it's a term
how dramatic.
It was a term used that says everything you do is critical to somebody else's safety or your own safety.
Wow.
And it was something that I took to heart. Once I did that, I got a perspective of railroading in general that really shaped how I became a train dispatcher.
Okay.
And how serious I took that job.
It was kind of the same thing with me. I've been in law enforcement dispatching for 33 years now, and it's basically the same thing. One small mistake in dispatching or not getting a backup unit or something like that, or giving a full description of the scene, could cost somebody's life, either the public or my officers. So I understand the critical need for knowing all of the rules like that. Our rules weren't the size of a Houston phone book, but they were pretty extensive. So I feel you on that. So want to back up a little bit more. Now, you said you didn't have any family in railroading. You just had a natural liking of it. Was this since childhood, or what were your earliest memories of trains as a child?
It was probably, of course, the model train set that my dad and I had built.
Right.
We did that several years. When I did move to the Woodlands, he gave me about half the garage to build a railroad of my own. And from there, I started actually paying attention to what real railroads did.
Right.
And this was in my junior high, early high school years. I made a few friends, back with the Missouri Pacific and then the UP, started studying things like timetables and really, really paid attention to how the railroad worked. I really became a huge rail fan, of which I'm not now, but I love.
As I hear from most guys that work for the railroad, no, I'm not a rail fan, not anymore.
No, and that's exactly right. For 13 years I worked for the railroad, but I never saw a train because I was, in the dispatching center. So right. The train to me was a red line on the street.
Wow.
It was not really going out to the field or meeting the people that I'm talking to on a daily basis. It was, most of the time, handling whatever situation it was, but I'd have to visualize it in my head, to see in real life what it was, what they were doing. But, I started that. I got my first car, when I turned 16 or 17, I don't remember which now. And I used to go down to Spring, Texas and sit at the Y and watch trains go by.
We know that Y very well. Right there on the north side of the yard.
Yeah, right there by Wetcher Brothers.
Right.
Huge place to sit and watch trains. It was, 20 minutes from my house. It was safe. It was lighted. I could go anytime, day or night, and kind of see what was going on. And I had a friend that was not quite as interested as I was, but he liked trains nonetheless. And periodically he would go with me down there. And so beyond the rail fanning, as a kid, and then I discovered the Gulf Coast chapter of the NRHS, became a member of NRHS for, 10 or 15 years, and really got to meet other people, including yourself and Mr. Leaders here, that were also interested in trains. And that kind of really grew my love of railroads at the time.
Well, guys, we're going to take our first break here from the first segment. This is the train station on TNCRadio.live. If you're enjoying the program, would you like to be a guest on the program, or maybe you have a suggestion for a guest on the program? We would love to hear from you. Our email address is HoustonRailFans@gmail.com. Drop us a line. We'd love to hear from you. This is the train station. We'll be right back.
Hey, rideshare drivers and gig economy workers, the host of TNCRadio.live, the Rideshare Rodeo Podcast, and the Gig Economy Podcast come together for news, talk, music, stories, laughs, and more. We're live Fridays at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central, right here on TNCRadio.live.
It's Steve Summers' Overnight Drive, midnight Eastern, 11 p.m. Central, right here on TNCRadio.live. Brought to you by Hot Shot Secret. Kathy DeCaro is nothing short of amazing. She not only drives the world's biggest truck as a heavy equipment operator in northern Alberta, Canada. She's an international motivational speaker and the author of Dream Big, an autobiography about overcoming a lifetime of trauma and abuse that led to dreams of success. Kathy inspires people the world over to change their lives and improve their self-worth. Her book will change your life. She's passionate about personal growth and believes anyone can change their circumstances and overcome their obstacles if they believe in themselves. Her life will amaze you and seriously inspire you. Be sure to order a copy of her book, Dream Big, on Amazon.com. I'm Shelley Johnson with Kathy Tuccaro. You can hear us Tuesdays on TNCRadio.live at 8 p.m. Eastern on Women Road Warriors. And don't miss Steve Summers' Overnight Drive right here on TNCRadio.live, weeknights midnight to 5 a.m. Eastern. Brought to you by Hot Shot Secret.
Welcome back to the train station on TNCRadio.live. I'm Bill Waldrop along with Jim Leaders, my co-host, and our guest this week is Andrew Hudanish, who has a lengthy history in railroading and continues to do so to this day, and we'll get to that momentarily. Andrew, again, thanks for joining us. I want to get back with you in your dispatching with Union Pacific, which you did for 20 years, from 1998 to 2018. I wanted to bring you on to talk more about what a dispatcher does. Now, we all know that there are dispatchers for the railroad, but we don't really know what they do. What is the primary responsibility? What sorts of technology do you have to communicate with the trains? Do you have cameras, or is it just radio? Kind of give us a deep background of railroad dispatching and how it works.
Okay. Dispatching is basically the heart and soul of the operations department of the railroad. It is used for the safe and efficient operation of the railroad, both by trains, train crews, maintenance away, the public. If you're a train dispatcher, you're pretty much immersed in all of that at the same time. But the top goal is safety, 100%.
Right. Of course.
Everything revolves around safety. You know, to look at a train dispatcher and look at his job and look at what he has to deal with, you know, you have 8 or 10 computer screens in front of you, plus a two-way radio console that, you can pick multiple stations from across your territory. And then you've got, a regular PC with all of its accoutrement. It's been called the world's largest Nintendo game.
I like that. Okay.
Well, hold on. There's a caveat to that.
All right.
It's real people on the other end of that radio or on the other end of that screen.
Right.
So you're dealing with episodic events that take place anytime, day or night. You've got to be ready. So you're on basically 8 hours and 15 minutes of the high alert, just waiting for something to happen while you're planning the rest of your railroad. So you're waiting for a train to call you and say, hey, we just hit a car. You're waiting for maintenance away to say, I've got a broken rail or I've got a switch that's out of correspondence that won't line. Those kind of things really put a damper on what you're doing.
Right.
So the computer screens are connected to, in this case, when I was dispatching, they were connected to a mainframe. So they still had a VAX 300 that was running the entire network. They had 7 of them, one for the east, one for the west, one for the north. There were hot standbys for each one. And then number 7 was a cold standby that could be switched over to any of the 3 should both of the other ones fail. So UP actually ran out of parts to keep the mainframes going and started purchasing stuff on eBay.
Wow.
So computer cards from the 1980s, that were refurbished or whatever, were keeping the dispatching center alive.
That's how old the technology was that
Yes.
they were still using.
Yeah, it came out in 1982
Yeah.
as CAD.
Right.
It was started out in the Pacific Northwest on the UP. The Missouri Pacific did not have the CAD system until the merger was completed.
Okay.
So the original UP up in the Pacific Northwest, through the Dales, Oregon, and up that way, that was where it first started.
They must have had fun integrating Missouri Pacific in, and then the Katy, and put in all that trackage and all that stuff. And I'm sure all the railroads had different kind of rules. That had to be a nightmare getting all that integrated together.
It really was. The mergers of the late 80s and mid 90s there were very hard on the parent Union Pacific.
Right.
There was quite a bit of technology that would come in, like the Southern Pacific in 96 had a dispatching system called Digicon. It was Windows-based on a PC at your desk, and then they had a client-server situation, to the back office. Whereas CAD, ran on the mainframe.
All right.
Well, the two were not compatible with each other at all.
Of course not.
So during the Y2K scare, Digicon came back and wanted a tidy sum of funds to site license the new version of Windows and the new version of CAD that they had on their system.
Right.
UP made the command decision to start switching everybody over to the Union Switch and Signal CAD system, which by then was called CAD 2.
Okay.
It had gone through an upgrade at some point. And when CAD 2 was out, they started putting specific subdivisions of the SP onto UP's CAD.
Okay.
And it's a very slow process, because everything has to be tested and double tested and triple tested. And, you got to have the field where the field talks to the new CAD system, the way it talked to the old CAD system. And I actually qualified as a dispatcher on both systems.
Oh, that's good.
So I was one of the few that could go back and forth between the two different systems. So if people remember back, the SP had what they call DTC. Everything was done in a block format, whereas the UP, it was done under track warrant, which is the milepost to milepost format. So it took a while to get the crews and get the maintenance away to move over and start acclimating to the new way of doing things. But it worked.
Yeah. So that kind of brings up another question. You think as a train dispatcher, all you talk to is trains. That's certainly not the case. You talk to anybody that's out on the right of way. That could be maintenance away. It could be signals. It could be crossing gate repair. Anything that could affect the main line. You're talking to all of these people, and you're the sole person that controls that large territory. Is that correct?
That's correct. The Houston terminal area is divided up into 3 separate dispatchers because it's such a busy complex.
Right.
Most of the road jobs are 150, 200, maybe 250 miles at times. Some of it's single main line, some of it's multiple subdivisions, all of that kind of stuff. So you're constantly talking or sending authorities to, or taking authorities up, or protecting slow orders, or whatever needs to be done on that multitude of territories, all at once.
Now, unlike police dispatching, which I've done, we listen to a channel, and the channel's open all the time for anybody to call in. Am I correct in that you don't have just open radio channels that you're listening to all the time? They have to call you. You have to acknowledge it and talk to each person, because they could be anywhere in that 200 miles of trackage. So you can't listen to all that at one time. Is that correct?
That's correct. So the railroad uses a service called AvTech, which is a computerized touchscreen radio terminal. So from that, you can select certain radio towers that are spaced every, 20 or 30 miles. And when the crews or maintenance away or the signal guys or anybody needs to contact you, they have to dial a certain code on the keypad of their radio. When that code is acknowledged, they'll get a tone back from the tower saying that they're in the queue to be, talked to. Once the dispatcher goes to that channel, which is probably usually is the same channel all the way across their territory, but it's separate radio towers because radio only goes so far.
Oh, correct.
So you acknowledge that, you pick up the tower that train or that maintenance away person is calling you on. You answer it according to the G Corps and the UP rules, UP radio rules.
Okay. So
you answer it, UP dispatcher 32 spring, and you got to find out who you're talking to because you have no idea.
Right.
And then they identify themselves, and then you start your conversation back and forth.
Interesting. So now, if I remember, I believe I came up to visit you one time up there years ago, and I believe at the time you were working somewhere, the radio system or the railroad in Louisiana, And I remember listening to some of the people that you had to converse with in southern Louisiana, where they have a very distinct way of speaking. Accent. We'll leave it as an accent. And you kind of had to learn a whole different way of communicating because it's unlike anywhere else in the country.
You had to learn how to talk Cajun.
That's it.
Oh, and there was definitely some Cajun employees out there that clung to their old habits for a long time. And yes, I did work that job quite a bit in the beginning.
Is that like Livonia?
Yeah, it was the Beaumont Livonia job. So it was basically Houston to Livonia to Avondale, and then the whole Lake Charles sub. So Lake Charles to Alexandria.
So did you work all UP territories dispatched out of Spring at one time or another?
I did not work them all. I did not work Tower 55 in Fort Worth.
Right.
That was held by some fairly senior dispatchers that were from the area up there in Fort Worth.
Right.
So they kept that one. I never trained on that one. I never trained on the Valentine sub. Way out in West Texas.
Oh, I know. I've been to Valentine. There's not much out there other than
no, there's not. I haven't trained out there, but I did train everything from Alpine, Texas, east.
Okay.
Across the Sunset route. So all the SD jobs in San Antonio, the Austin sub, and then all the way to New Orleans.
Yeah, really. What was your favorite subdivision to work?
My favorite one was the Austin sub.
Okay.
Super busy.
Yep.
It's double main track coming out of San Antonio. You've got BNSF, trackage rights trains. You've got Amtrak twice a day, and you've got places where, you're having trains come onto your railroad from other railroads.
Right.
So it was the most challenging job, I thought, to keep up with during the day.
Did you ever have any downtime at all? I mean, was it constant, or was there a time to take a drink of coffee or something? Was it constant?
We ate lunch at our desks primarily,
right?
But I mean, for the most part, on the day shift, it was pretty constant.
Yeah.
Afternoons, about the time the sun went down, you could start to breathe a little bit, and it was a little less busy. And then, of course, midnights was just strictly running trains because you didn't have maintenance away in the middle of the night unless there was some, event that happened.
Right. Well, I'll tell you what, let's take a break. We're through segment 2. This is going quick and a fascinating story. We appreciate you being here. Our guest this week is Andrew Hudanish, who was a dispatcher for the Union Pacific Railroad for over 20 years and has moved on to other projects, which we're going to get to next. You are on the train station on TNCRadio.live. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Don't forget, you can hear all of our TNC Radio primetime shows again on our podcasts. Just go to tncradio.live/podcasts or search for tncradio.live wherever you listen to podcasts.
This infoblog on tncradio.live is brought to you by the Truckers Network at app.thetruckersnetwork.net. 4 things truck drivers need to know about motor truck cargo insurance. Motor truck cargo legal liability insurance, also referred to as cargo insurance, covers the loss or damage to the freight you're hauling. When hauling cargo, there's always a risk that it could be damaged or stolen. While there are no legal requirements to have cargo insurance, it is highly recommended to better protect yourself and the goods you're hauling. What is cargo insurance? Cargo insurance protects you from financial loss if the freight you're hauling gets damaged or lost. In the event of an accident, cargo insurance pays for the amount you're insured for only if the event is covered. Cargo damage resulting from collision, accidents, fire, and spoilage are examples of covered events in most cargo policies. Benefits of cargo insurance. When hauling cargo, someone's paying you to safely deliver someone's assets from point A to point B. The main benefit of motor truck cargo insurance is that you reduce financial loss if the cargo you're hauling gets damaged. Also, purchasing cargo insurance gives you a peace of mind knowing that you're covered if your cargo gets damaged. How is cargo premium determined? The motor truck cargo rate depends on the type of cargo you're hauling. The classifications include dry van freight, flatbed freight, refrigerated freight or reefer, autos, household goods mover, and hazmat. As there are many different cargo classifications for a motor carrier, discuss with your agent the type of freight you intend on hauling. Insurance carriers generally classify motor carriers with the highest commodities hauled. So even if you only intend to haul autos 5% of the time and 95% of the time flatbed freight, your premium will be based on an auto hauler. This is why it's so important to talk with your agent about everything you'll be hauling. This ensures that the policy is written the correct way and excludes nothing that you intend to haul. Nobody wants to be stuck with a cargo claim commodity that's not covered under their policy. Please note that the coverages, limits, and explanations of coverages mentioned here can differ with every motor truck cargo policy, depending on the type of cargo hauled and carrier requirements. Please discuss what is included and what can be added on or endorsed to your policy or quote with your current agent. What limits are you required to carry? There are many factors that determine the cargo limit a motor carrier should carry. Unlike commercial auto liability, generally the shipper who owns the freight will provide you with a minimum limit required to haul a load for them, not the federal government. The standard limit of cargo insurance for general freight is $100,000, but this limit can differ. For example, if a carrier is an auto hauler, his cargo limit could be anywhere from $150,000 to $1 million depending on the number of autos hauled and the auto's conditions. This info blog was brought to you by the Truckers Network at app.thetruckersnetwork.net. TNCRadio.live, your commercial driver navigation station.
Welcome back to the train station on TNCRadio.live. I'm Bill Waldrop along with Jim Leaders, my co-host, and our guest this week is Andrew Hudanish, who apparently I got into the fascinating world of dispatching for railroads and the Union Pacific Railroad, and I am proud to say that. He's a good friend and obviously a very good dispatcher. Andrew, last couple segments we're talking more about Union Pacific dispatching. I wanted to bring up with you, you worked all the different subdivisions and things like that, and like police dispatching, which I have done and continue to do, you have to be the rock of the channel. I mean, and what I mean by that is when the you-know-what hits the fan and people start screaming on the radio and major serious things happen, you have to stay in control. Somebody has to stay in control, and that's what the dispatcher does. Tell me about it on the railroading side. Have you ever worked, big derailments? Obviously they hit cars. We know that happens. And I hate to say it, anybody killed in the line of duty. Has any of that happened to you?
Yeah, it happens. It's something you can't exactly plan for, but you need to be ready for it to happen.
Absolutely.
So I've got two short stories I'll tell you about. First one was the absolute scariest day on the railroad for me as the dispatcher. All right. For people who are familiar with Weimar, Texas, on the Glidden subdivision, it's a 10,000 plus foot long siding on the west end of town. At about 7 o'clock in the evening, I had an eastbound Z train, containers, trailers, that kind of stuff, right, coming east at, whatever his maximum train speed was, probably 60 or 70 miles an hour. I had a westbound train leaving Glidden Yard, which is just outside of Columbus.
Right.
It was 2 engines and just a handful of cars. The guys were headed home for the night. They were headed back to Flatonia to tie up. So I'm working, doing my thing. All of a sudden, I get a CAD alert that the switch at the east end of Weimar went out of correspondence, which means the switch is not locked in the position that it was originally asked for.
Okay.
Okay. So you don't know if it's moved. You don't know if it's just a malfunction. You don't know. But at the same time, that eastbound Z train which arrived at Weimar ahead of the westbound local, at least according to CAD. So the westbound local on the screen showed to be east of the east switch.
Okay.
The Z train showed to have run through the east end of the east switch.
Uh-oh.
And now we're looking at a headlight meet out there on the other end of Weimar.
In the downtown area.
It would have been, yes.
Yeah.
It would have been.
Yeah.
What happened?
So I get on the radio when I notice what's going on. This all takes place in a matter of about 4 seconds.
Oh.
Okay. I get on the radio and I start hollering at either train.
Yeah. Stop your train. Stop your train.
Immediately. Yeah. So I'm looking, trying to find out who's on first, who's where, because the CAD display did not show what was really going on in the field. So I'm thinking, okay, nobody's answering.
Oh no.
Nobody's answering. And I mean, it was 4 or 5 minutes before I got an answer out of the westbound local.
So if you have no response on the radio, that you're thinking worst case scenario here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm already making phone calls.
Yeah.
I get people rolling that way because I need to find out what's going on.
Right.
Finally, the westbound local answers. We had left the radio channel open at that time because there was so much going on.
Right.
The westbound local answers and said, "Dispatcher, we're between switches," which was the absolute best news that could have happened.
Good.
The eastbound Z train did run through the switch and kept running out the east end towards Weimar or towards Columbus. They didn't answer until their entire train was back on the main track. They were at least the full train length, so 6,000 or 8,000 feet east of the east switch.
Wow.
It was a 30-mile-an-hour turnout. They went through the turnout at like 66 miles an hour.
And stayed upright. That's amazing.
And the crew had fallen asleep.
Oh, no.
Yes, they admitted it on the radio.
Oh,
They finally answered.
That's why
Fired.
they had no answer. Wow.
Fired
They
on
were-
the spot.
But when they went through that switch, I mean, I thought, oh my gosh, this is the end. I'm going to be calling people at home,
Right,
get
right.
going on this.
Get the
But
go
when
team on
they
the
finally
air.
all answered, and everything calmed down. We made them stop. Of course, all the trains stopped. Got everything sorted out. Let the local go on to Flatonia because they didn't do anything wrong.
Right.
But the eastbounder, he was dead right there. The manager out of Smithville came down and relieved him.
That's the end of that career.
Yeah.
That was the end of that engineer's career. Yeah.
Wow.
That's a frightening story, Andrew. And what time in the morning was this? After midnight?
This was actually like 7:00 in the evening.
Oh, early.
People who would have been out there, that would have been awful.
The local was headed home. They died at 8:00.
Yeah.
And so they were headed back to Flatonia.
Now let me ask you this: you said before we went to the last break that things slow down at different hours of the night. To me, I think the railroad runs the same 24 hours a day. It didn't matter if it was day or night. You were saying that after midnight it actually slows down or gets quieter. I don't know. That kind of breaks my illusion of thinking that it was always crazy 24 hours a day.
Now with precision railroading, it's a little different. I'll admit that. But when I was dispatching, yes, the midnight trick was usually a little bit slower, but that's only because you did not have the maintenance away or signal people out there testing or putting in new rail or putting a switch in or putting a crossing in or whatever, because they work during the daylight hours.
Right.
So you got a little bit of a reprieve by working the evening or midnight shift. And they would usually put the lesser capable dispatchers. I don't want to say they're bad dispatchers or anything, but they were dispatchers that, a daylight shift would eat their lunch.
Okay.
There were people out there like that.
Well, it's same with police dispatching. It's the same thing.
The daylight shift was, of course, the busiest because you just had it coming at you from every direction.
Right.
You had somebody wanting something, either track time or a signal or a backup move or, whatever the case may be, or protect the slow order. That was one of the hardest things to do.
Well, I'll tell you what, we got about 5 minutes left here on this segment here. I want to move. You left Union Pacific in 2018 and you went to work for another company, but it was kind of related to Union Pacific in a way. Tell us about that move.
Well, in 2018, Union Pacific had a mass furlough event that started in October and then happened several more times after that. They laid off managers, they laid off pretty much anybody they could that was not in the operations department.
Okay.
So in other words, people who run trains, people who dispatch trains, people who, actually do the maintenance away, that kind of stuff. They were pretty much kept on, but anybody they could take the job and farm out to a consultant or to a contractor, they took most of those jobs. I was laid off with 475 of my closest pals that day.
Wow.
Yeah, it was painful.
I bet.
Went to work for a company called Alfred Benish and Company. They stepped in and became the contractor or became the consultant of choice for what Union Pacific called their public projects division.
Okay.
Which was part of engineering. Now, public projects is where the public interfaces with the railroad, most commonly at railroad crossings.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so we did the design, we did the engineering, we did the construction management.
Repairs, things like that?
No, not really repairs. This would mostly be new.
Oh, okay, new construction.
New stuff,
okay.
Or complete upgrades.
Gotcha.
So in other words, we would take a crossing, say, that's really busy, say Makawa and Long Drive at Griggs.
Oh, yeah, that's amazing.
Everybody knows where the south end of South Yard.
Oh, yeah.
That's all getting ready to become overpasses.
Really? Wow.
Yes, but that's what we do. That's
so,
what Benish
so
does.
eliminating the grade crossings completely.
Yeah. But we put in new ones, we design new ones. The railroad is actually the one that puts them in.
Well, I was going to ask you, you're going to put in overpasses for all the roads that come together there. Is the railroad paying for that?
It's actually a federal highway grant through Texas.
Okay. So it's a cooperative effort between, Highway Department or City of Houston and the railroads, things like that.
Yes.
Okay.
And so as the consultant, you're the one that's making those deals with the city to, and the county and the state, to cover those kind of projects and to identify where those projects would be most beneficial.
Now, you state you were a construction manager for the public projects.
Right.
What did that position do?
I would actually go out on site during construction and inspect the job from the railroad perspective.
Okay.
So in other words, they send in plans 2 or 3 years before a project ever gets built.
Okay.
But we have to go out and make sure that the clearances are correct.
Right.
So the bridge that they're building is not too low and a double stack's going to hit it. Things
Right.
like that most people don't realize that somebody actually has to do. There's
Right.
minimum clearances, for everything from electrical lines and phone cables to, how deep a pipeline has to be buried and all that kind of stuff. That's the kind of stuff a construction manager goes out and verifies.
Wow. That's a lot of responsibility.
It's huge. And it's all across the country. I was based here in Houston, but I went to Idaho and Washington and Arizona, of course, all across Texas. I think I have a second home in El Paso right now.
Which I lived in for a couple of years, and I loved El Paso. It was a great city. A lot of railroad activity out there. Well, guys, believe it or not, that's the end of segment 3. We're going to take another quick break here, grab a cup of coffee. Our guest this week is Andrew Hudanish, a good friend and worked for Union Pacific for 20 years and continues in a railroad capacity in even to today, but not with Union Pacific anymore. We'll come back with him in just a few minutes and find out what he's doing today to wrap up the show. Thanks for joining us here on the train station on tncradio.live. We'll be right back.
I'm Dr. Christopher Cortman, and now for the Mental Health Minute. Let's talk about anxiety. Did you know that anxiety is now considered to be the common cold of all mental illness? Yeah, as a matter of fact, 18% of our population is deemed to have an anxiety disorder. And I think the other 82% are lying about it. But is anxiety a mental illness? Is it a disorder? I mean, isn't it normal to be anxious? How do you know when you have an anxiety disorder versus normal anxiety? Well, there are 3 ways we can measure that: frequency, intensity, and duration of your anxiety. In other words, how often are you anxious? How much of the day do you spend nervous, worried, edgy? And how intense is your anxiety? I mean, does it interfere with your life? Do you have panic attacks? Does it stop you from dealing with other people and situations? And then the duration. How long does it last when you are anxious? If you find that any of those 3 or all 3 of those things are significant, it might be time to get some professional help. But where does anxiety come from? Not from situations, not from other people or circumstances in your life. Anxiety comes from the perception of threat. In fact, investment plus perceived threat is the formula for anxiety. In other words, you have to care about something, and you have to perceive that that something is threatened in order to create anxiety. So if you are anxious, what do we do with that? Let me give you 4 things that will work right away if you're dealing with anxiety. First, daily exercise. The research says if you exercise daily, you will decrease your anxiety. Secondly, learn to breathe properly. Even in short-term anxiety-inducing situations, inhaling to the count of 3 and exhaling to the count of 5 will reduce your anxiety significantly. Thirdly, take that formula that I gave you and figure out, am I too invested in something that doesn't really mean that much? Can I see this in a less threatening manner? Because if I can think differently, it will also reduce my anxiety. And finally, and this begins with young people all the way to the end of life, face the things that you're afraid of. By facing the things that scare you and championing those things, you will reduce your anxiety and become a more confident person.
TNCRadio.live, your commercial driver navigation station.
This is TNCRadio.live, and you are in the train station. Thank you so much for joining us this week. I'm Bill Waldrop, along with Jim Leaders, my co-host. If you'd like to make a comment about the show or like to be a guest on it, we'd love to hear your questions and comments. We can be reached via email at houstonrailfans@gmail.com. Drop us a line. Our guest this week is Andrew Hudanish. Andrew worked for the Union Pacific Railroad for about 20 years and then went on to work for other companies. And Andrew, you are now employed by the Texas Department of Transportation. Now, that sounds like a big difference or a big change from railroading, but again, it is still involving railroading. Tell us, how did you come about this job and exactly what you do for them?
It's ironic that I actually do work for TXDOT, for the Department of Transportation. I work in the rail division. It's a small group, about 20 people, 25 people maybe, that we handle all of the railroad construction projects that are in the state of Texas. What I do is I manage the public projects, just like I did for Benish. I now do from the other side of the table for the state of Texas.
No, wait, this is any construction of railroading or any construction that affects roadways in the state?
Most of it is roadway work.
Okay.
There's a few items where we get kind of outside of the box when it comes to roadway construction. We've been known to pay for things like siding extensions or new sidings that are outside of the city limits of a certain town, because of traffic congestion and things like that. sometimes it's cheaper to build a siding than it is to build an overpass. So we look at all the projects statewide. I'm currently looking at about 150 for 2021's fiscal year, which is what we're in right now.
Right.
That started, no, we're in 2022's fiscal year. I'm sorry.
So you're looking at 150 different projects?
Just to do with road crossings. Yes, sir.
Wow.
So we're looking at upgrading or replacing the equipment at road crossings, either the drive surface, the roadway surface that you drive on, or gates and lights, cantilevers, quiet zones, train activated signaling, all of that kind of stuff kind of falls under our purview.
Is TXDOT actually doing the construction, or you're overseeing it as a state regulator to make sure that everything is done correctly for that crossing and the railroad actually installs it?
There you go. The railroad does the installation of all of this stuff, but it's under our project, and we usually pay for, 90% of the cost of the replacement hardware.
Which I'm sure the railroad's enjoying every bit of that.
Yeah, they do cost share with us on certain projects, some that are beneficial more so to the railroad than they are to the public. We look at those and figure out, is there a safety improvement in this project somewhere that we can justify paying for it?
Did you go after this job, or did they find you? How did you get into this? This is fascinating.
Well, because I was doing it for Benish and I did it for Union Pacific for a while too. I knew all the people in this department because I've dealt with them for years.
Right.
So I saw this job come up, one of the job websites.
Right.
And when I saw it, I immediately applied for it.
Huh.
Now, the way I applied for it was not the way that TXDOT normally does their hiring. They normally have an in-house website, their own application and everything like that. Well, I filed on somebody else's third-party employment site, and it got back to my current boss, and he's like, hey, he called me. I was actually in Mexico. He calls me and goes, hey, we want to talk to you about this job that you applied for. I had actually already kind of forgotten about it because I had applied for it like 2 months before.
Right.
And anyway, so he calls me up and we did an phone interview, and I drove to Austin and did a face-to-face interview with him, and the rest is history. I'm now working for TXDOT.
What's interesting about your story, Andrew, is that you've had such a roundabout work experience with railroading, from being a rail fan to being a dispatcher, to being project managers, and now working for the state. You've seen just about every facet of railroading to this point, and that's amazing. It's really good because I interfaced with just about every department except for labor relations. As I worked my way through my different jobs, so real estate and law and, the signal design, track design, we didn't really deal with like locomotives or anything like that, even though TXDOT actually owns a railroad. What, hold on. What was that?
TXDOT owns a railroad. Out in West
tell me
Texas.
about that. Okay.
It's called the Texas Pacifico. It used to be part of the South Orient.
Yeah. Okay. Sure.
So TXDOT physically owns the rail line. They lease it to another company, but we physically own it.
I had no idea that TXDOT owned a railroad.
Yeah. And they're getting ready to open it back up at Presidio,
right?
Where the bridge that was there burned down. There's now a brand new bridge, and it's getting ready to open back up as soon as they build the customs and border protection station down there to do the inspections on the trains.
Andrew, sounds like a fascinating all-around railroad experience through your entire life. You're doing it all. Is there anything you would like to do, that you have not accomplished yet in railroading?
One of the things I always wanted to do was get my engineer's license.
Really? Okay.
I have wanted to. There was a job on the Union Pacific, which was half manager of train operations, an MTO's job.
Right.
And then there was half, roadmaster's job, manager of road operations is what they called it.
All right.
And it was a field job, but you had to be a licensed engineer to actually have the job, because if something happened, you needed to intervene in a situation. You know, you need to move a train off the main line or something like that. They wanted the manager to be capable of doing that.
Right.
And so I looked into it, and it was very difficult as a non-union manager to get that position. So I never did get my engineer certification, but I would like to do it someday.
I think that was a smart move, Andrew, because that MRO guy, I deal with them every once in a while. I mean, they're on call 24 hours a day, every day practically, and they got a tough life out there.
Oh, they do. Absolutely. And they're in far-flung parts of the railroad. They're not in downtown Houston.
Right. And now they've cut a bunch of them off, and now the guy's even got more territory. It's a horrible job.
Well, Andrew, this has been a great look at your life in the world of railroading. You're a good friend, and I'm very proud of you. And I'm very proud of the fact that I had something to do with you getting into it. I'm still kind of blown away by that. And so thank you for being with us today. I hope you've enjoyed it. It's been a great story. So we appreciate you being with us today. Andrew, any final words as we wrap it up today?
I think we're good. Just be safe out there, please.
Absolutely. And don't go around the gates.
Yeah.
Do not.
Do not go around the gates. That is Jim Leaders over there. I am Bill Walter. We are your host here for the train station on TNCRadio.live. Our guest this week is Andrew Hudanish. Andrew, again, thanks for joining us. Have a great day, everybody. We'll see you on the next show.